throughout this presentation, viewer discretion is advised. We will be showing some clips which are not appropriate for children. There are some clips that show scenes of violence and horror.
Hello everyone. We are once again visiting our friends at Islamic Pulse. And yes, here and there you will see violent images. However, almost none of the points they make in this video are dependent on any of the video game or movie footage they included. Most of that was merely filler for shock value, so I have edited the bulk of it out. The few instances where they directly reference a video game or film to make a point, I have left intact. For their full video, please see the link in the description. But before we begin, for reference, let's remind ourselves exactly where Islamic Pulse is coming from. Right. Qom, Iran. I wonder why I took the time to point that out. Let's begin.
Weapons of mass deception.
Sheikh Yusuf Ali. My veteran subscribers might at least remember the Sheikh's voice from one of my earliest videos. But if you haven't heard the Sheikh speak before, simply know that when it comes to mass deception, he is a very practiced orator.
Research suggests that the dramatic increase in interpersonal violence in the past century has occurred at the same time as other dramatic changes in lifestyles. Among the most notable of these for child development has been the introduction of the mass visual media into children's everyday life.
From the Daily Mail, August 2007. Smirking murderer is led to the gallows as children join crowds at public executions in Iran.
Many times, parents who are conscientious about the type of media they allow their children to view, they are a little bit lenient, or very lenient when it comes to violence and horror.
Even though evidence is steadily accumulating that prolonged exposure to violent TV programming during childhood is associated with subsequent aggression.
From January 30th, 2017. Iran. Public execution of 4 young men of 22 to 26 years old in one day. 87 executions since the beginning of January. The Iranian regime hanged 4 young men, aged 22 to 26, in Mashhad and Bandar Abbas, northeast and southern Iraq respectively, on Sunday, January 29th. The 2 hanged in Mashhad had been charged with Moharaba, or waging war on God. 2 days earlier, 2 inmates, 26 and 39, were hanged in Lakan prison in the northern city of Rashat. As such, the total number of executions since the start of the year stands at 87, 2.5 times the figure for December. The victims, mostly young, included 2 women and 2 adolescents. 7 were hanged in public.
I hear about young children, for example, daring each other, and they say that, why don't you watch this movie? They get together, for example, for a sleepover, and they get a movie which is very violent or has horror, and just to have a laugh and scare themselves, they watch this movie.
Iranian judge orders woman to be blinded in Sharia law eye for eye retribution. A woman will be blinded in one eye in Iran after a judge ruled she should suffer an eye-for-eye punishment under Sharia law. The country's Supreme Court made the decision after the defendant, who has not been named, carried out an acid attack which left her victim without sight. The woman threw acid in the face of her victim, Sima, in Dashat, a city in the southwest of the Middle East country, 2 years ago, according to the Iranian news agency Tasnim. Head of the country's judiciary, Majid Karami, said, "The sentence to blindness in one eye, payment of blood money, and 7 years of imprisonment have been confirmed by the highest court.
We need to take a closer look and see what sort of effect this has on our children.
Just a bit of harmless fun? Well, statistics have shown that third graders who preferred violent TV programs were rated more aggressive in school by peers.
That's an interesting statistic. Let's see if I can find that study. Ah, here it is. How did they conduct it? Longitudinal data were collected on 427 teenagers of an original group of 875 children who had participated in a study of third-grade children in 1960. Wait, 1960? How old is this study? 1972. That's the year that Pong came out. That's 1 year after the first coin-operated video game came out. You guys are citing statistics from 45 years ago. Golly, I wonder why you wouldn't use more recent data. How about we look at the comparison of video game sales and popularity set alongside the trends in youth crime? Wow, would you look at that? Video game sales rise, violent crime amongst youth falls. Now, correlation doesn't equal causation, but if you're arguing that video games are influencing kids to be more violent, I think you might be off base.
Another example is Call of Duty. It's one of the most popular video games that's played by children, especially boys. We know people who would even skip school to line up just so they can be the first in line to be able to purchase this video game.
Skipping a day of school to do something silly. Yes, because when kids do that, their lives are ruined forever as a result. Tell me more.
Have we looked and seen what sort of messages these have for our children?
The advent of video games in particular raised new questions about the potential impact of media violence, since the video game player is an active participant rather than merely a viewer. In other words, you're in control of the violence now.
Stoning to death punishment in 21st century Iran, February 7th, 2017. A criminal court in Iran's eastern province of Loristan sentenced a woman and a man to be executed by stoning for alleged illegitimate relations found in a grab clip file. Stoning to death refers to a method of execution in which an organized group throws stones or rocks at the person they wish to execute. This is a gruesome penalty in which the victim is buried up to their shoulders.
Here you can see what sort of violence can be found in a video game that many children play.
Remember, no Russian.
Right? What kind of people are they killing? Innocent people who happen to be boarding a flight. Now, this is the type of terrorism that unfortunately in the real world we're exposed to, we hear about.
If there's homosexual men, the punishment is one of 5 things. One, the easiest one may be, chop their head off. That's the easiest. Second, burn them to death. Third, throw them off a cliff. Fourth, tear down a wall on them so they die under that. Fifth, a combination of the above. We have a hadith on that. Now, whether somebody is going to accept that, that's up to the jurists to read and understand. There's definitely some of those apply. Now, maybe the combination. But this is something that's there.
We can see here that that type of terrorist mindset somehow is encouraged even in the video games that children are playing. Now, this is something which is unacceptable.
And you might think that, well, it doesn't affect me or my children in that way. As long as our surrounding environment is peaceful, violence in the media doesn't matter. Or does it?
War games. Iran opens chilling kids' military theme park with AK-47s where children as young as 8 fire bullets at U.S. flags and effigies of the Israeli Prime Minister. Children dress up in full combat gear and pretend to be attacking enemies like Israel and the West. The 8th of December, 2016.
Dr. Huseman argues that exposure to violence in television, movies, video games, cell phones, and on the internet increases the risk of violent behavior on the viewer's part.
Houseman again, this time quoting an article by Houseman from 2007, reiterating much of what was proposed in his 1972 study, though adding in video games and cell phones, neither of which existed in any meaningful form in 1972. And yet, there's still these numbers that neither he nor our friends at Islamic Pulse ever bother to mention, let alone refute.
Just as growing up in an environment filled with real violence increases the risk of them behaving violently.
Again, if such were the case, why is youthful violent crime in the U.S. decreasing over time rather than increasing?
We don't want to live in a cave. There is violence in this world. There are people who do kill each other unjustly.
We wasn't causing any harm to nobody. We had no weapons on us at all.
Johnson says they keep walking. Then the officer confronts the boys. Moments later, shots ring out. The Ferguson police officer fires his gun.
The Ferguson shooting. Okay. That clip that you showed of Dorian Johnson, who was proven to be a liar by the physical evidence and other witness testimony, he was officially known as Witness 101, and Witness 101 was the source of the now infamous hands up, don't shoot narrative, amongst other things. But I'm getting off track. The truth behind the Ferguson shooting is well known by now. You are not supporting your argument, using it as an example of an innocent person being killed. And tell me again about stoning people to death.
We know that there's been much violence that has taken place to the family of the Prophet, and we have horrific examples of children being slaughtered on the battlefield, for example, innocent children for no crime other than being thirsty on the day of Ashura.
Yes, and who committed that violence on the Prophet's family on the day of Ashura? The forces of Yazid I, a caliph of the Islamic faith.
We don't want to shy away from exposing our children to violence, but there's one time where you talk about violence as a reality and you teach children why that happens and why it's something which is bad. There's another time when you expose it in the form of entertainment, and it's seen as something which is positive, part of a great game that we're trying to play, and you don't give children the perspective on how this is something which is negative and needs to be avoided.
Iran. Wave of floggings, amputations, and other vicious punishments. Iran's persistent use of cruel and inhuman punishments, including floggings, amputations, and forced blinding over the past year, exposes the authorities' utterly brutal sense of justice, said Amnesty International. Hundreds are routinely flogged in Iran each year, sometimes in public. In the most recent flogging case recorded by Amnesty International, a journalist was lashed 40 times in Najaf Abad, Esfahan province, on 5 January after a court found him guilty of inaccurately reporting the number of motorcycles confiscated by police in the city. The authorities' prolific use of corporal punishment, including flogging, amputation, and blinding throughout 2016, highlights the inhumanity of a justice system that legalizes brutality.
Now, what kind of effect will this sort of thing have on our children if they're being exposed to it regularly? Many children play video games on a daily basis, many times for say 2 hours or 3 hours a day.
A Pew Research Center survey in 2008 found that half of all teens reported playing a video game yesterday, and those who played every day typically did so for an hour or more.
And look at how awful an impact all of that video game playing has had on the violence statistics. What is your point?
What we do isn't always just informed by what we think. A lot of times it's guided by what we feel. It's guided by our heart. Now, what is it that determines what our heart feels? Imam Ali says it's what we watch.
Would that include watching you educate others on how to think of and assess homosexuality as existing amongst the same kind of offenses as murder?
We have ahadith which condemn this as well too, which echo the message of the Quran. One example is that when this act is committed, according to hadith, the throne of Allah shakes. Okay, now, what does that mean, the throne of Allah? Allah doesn't have is not a physical entity, doesn't have a physical throne. It's an expression though, that when something is so heinous, something which is so greatly perverse, that the very foundations of what God wanted us to do is called into question. It's that we're completely going away from that purpose for which God created us. Now, one question that comes up, brothers and sisters, is the following, that how should we view those who are homosexual and who practice these type of things? First point is that we as believers should be troubled by seeing sin take place. Remember, we accept the notion of absolute truth, not relative truth. That act is a wrong act. They're harming their souls. They're doing something which is against the creation of God. So if somebody is actively acting upon this, we should be saddened by it. And we should be sad and troubled for those people, not that we should hate them. We hate the act. Initially, we're hating the act, and we find it a gruesome act, a terrible act. But we want to help the people. And if the occasion is present, we have to do what's called amr bil ma'ruf and nahy al munkar. We have to tell them that, okay, there's a right and there's a wrong. This is something which is wrong. And if they're willing to listen to the voice of reason, if they're willing to receive help, then we try to help them. If somebody is plagued with this, first of all, they should know that there is hope. Right? The biggest sin that we can possibly commit is to lose hope. So the first thing is that we should give people hope that there is a possibility. Allah says in the Quran, "La taqnatu min rahmatillah." Don't ever despair of the mercy of Allah. Allah can come and change our hearts. He can come and completely turn our situations upside down. So if there is somebody who's afflicted with this, first of all, we have to give them a message of hope that, look, if you want to, there is a way out of this. Second of all, we need to refer them to somebody who can give them counseling and advice, can explain some of the Islamic principles and some of the ways of addressing this. Some Islamic counselors that I know have like a 3 or 4 point plan that they put together, principles that they use to give advice to those who are afflicted with the situation. But there are some people, brothers and sisters, who don't admit that this is a problem. They don't want to be helped. They want to insist and they persist in this, and they don't even regard it as a sin. They say that, no, this is the way we're going to be, and you don't have any right to say anything against us. In that case, brothers and sisters, that's where that softness and that mercy and that opportunity to want to help, that's where we need to consider and understand that this is not a room, this is not a situation where we have to be soft. We have to be firm. Because here, the very principles of truth are being called into question. If we're just lenient on this issue, then it's going to be a problem. It's going to cause corruption in our society, in our communities. I mean, imagine if somebody is known to be a murderer, right? Are we going to be okay with them just walking around and not being guilty about what they do? No, they're doing a crime, and we're going to take them to account for that. The same way, if somebody's engaged and they're openly letting people know that they're engaging in this and they don't want to be helped, then we have to take a firm stance against that.
Which is startling considering that 97% of adolescents aged 12 to 17 play video games on a computer or on consoles such as the Wii, PlayStation, and Xbox, or on portable devices such as Game Boy, smartphones, and tablets.
Yes, video games are popular. We know.
Some of the ulama have explained this hadith to say that everything that we see, everything that we're exposed to visually, it doesn't just come and go from the screen and that's it. No, there's a place where it's recorded, which is our heart. And all those images and the messages associated with them, the ideologies that are associated with them, they gather together and they form a book which comprises our heart.
Really? If you see it, it forms a book that comprises your heart. Well, if the book that comprises your heart advocates lashes for incorrectly counting motorcycles, stoning for infidelity, child brides, and public hangings, what do you imagine you're going to end up seeing in your society? What kinds of hearts are going to be written out of that kind of book? Wherever you are. Gah, that ending always gives me the creeps. Anyway, I just love being moralized to by people who preach an ideology of barbarism and intolerance. It always warms my heart. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some bandits to behead with my level 46 two-handed specialist orc in Skyrim. I need to let off a little steam after trudging through that video. And I'm sure that, later tonight, I'll be hiking through the park with a machete, beheading innocent people. Because Skyrim told me to. As always, thank you for watching.